You won't believe what happened when my HOA tried to evict me, only to find out I actually own the president's house. This is the craziest revenge story you'll ever hear. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. When I moved in my new home, I was excited for a fresh start, peaceful neighborhood, nice surroundings, and the freedom of finally being a homeowner. But my excitement was short-lived because the HOA president, Karen, made it her mission to make my life miserable from day one. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, a middle-aged woman with an overinflated sense of authority who thrived on micromanaging every detail of everyone's property. She knocked on my door the very first day I moved in, clipboard in hand, and started listing violations I had supposedly committed. My car was parked slightly over the driveway line, my trash cans weren't brought in fast enough, and apparently, the shade of my curtains wasn't neighborhood compliant. I thought she was just being overly enthusiastic, so I nodded politely and assured her I'd look into it. But that was only the beginning. Within the first month, I received numerous warning letters, each more aggressive than the last. Karen escalated her harassment to daily inspections of my property, even snapping photos through my windows to find anything she could use against me. She sent fines for absurd reasons, like my mailbox not being the approved style or my lawn not being mowed to exactly 2 inches. She went as far as to harass my guests, stopping them in the street to ask where they were going and whether they had cleared their visit with the HOA. One time, my brother came over to help me install some new shelves, and she literally blocked his car with her golf cart, demanding to see proof that he wasn't a contractor violating neighborhood policies. Another time, she called a tow truck on my friend's car because she didn't recognize it, even though it was parked legally in my driveway. I started noticing her peeking over my fence, try to get a closer look at my backyard. She even left a note on my door saying my patio furniture wasn't HOA approved. How she even saw it, I had no idea. She also went after my dog, claiming that he was a nuisance, even though he barely barked. She started filing complaints with animal control, making up ridiculous accusations about him being aggressive or loose, even though I always kept him inside my fenced yard. Then came the ridiculous aesthetic complaints. She insisted my house color was too dark, even though it matched the approved shades on the HOA website. She tried to claim my grass was an unauthorized species and threatened fines if I didn't replace it with the HOA's preferred type, which, of course, she happened to sell through her landscaping consultation business. She once walked up to me while I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee, and had the audacity to tell me my choice of outdoor furniture wasn't elegant enough for the community's standards. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she handed me a printout of the suggested outdoor designs, all of which were from expensive designer brands. It was clear she was abusing her position in the HOA to push her own agenda. The real kicker was when she started sending threats of eviction, claiming that I was in violation of HOA rules and had forfeited my right to live in the neighborhood. This was bizarre because I owned my home outright. There was no landlord, no rental agreement, nothing that gave the HOA power to evict me. But Karen insisted she had final say over all property matters in the community. She even started showing up to city council meetings, claiming I was disturbing the peace and pushing for new rules that would allow her to have me removed. She posted notices on my door threatening legal action, claiming that my house would be seized if I didn't comply with the HOA's demands. She even tried to get my mail withheld, claiming I was ineligible to receive HOA community updates, whatever that meant. She took it a step further when she had my water shut off. Yes, she actually called the local utility company and falsely claimed my property was abandoned so that they would stop service. It took me days of arguing with them and showing proof of residency to have it turned back on. But Karen wasn't done. She also spread rumors around the neighborhood, telling people I was an untrustworthy resident and warning them not to associate with me. Some of my neighbors were reasonable, but a few of the HOA loyalists started giving me the cold shoulder, acting like I was some sort of criminal. When I refused to comply with her unreasonable demands, she lost it. She hand-delivered a final notice stating that legal action would be taken to have me removed from my own house. She smirked, acting like she had all the power in the world. That's when I realized I had enough. I decided to dig into Karen's history, and what I discovered made my jaw drop. Karen didn't even own the house she was living in. In fact, I did. The very property she lorded over me from belonged to me. I had unknowingly purchased the house she was renting, and now the tables were about to turn. Now that I knew this critical piece of information, I double-checked my records. Sure enough, her house was included in a bulk property purchase I had made as an investment. The irony was almost too much to handle. She had been trying to evict me from my own house while failing to realize that I was technically her landlord. I couldn't believe it. My frustration turned into amusement as I started formulating a plan. Karen had made my life miserable, but now I had the upper hand. I started gathering every piece of documentation I had: HOA letters, threats, videos of her harassment, and my ownership papers for her house. If she wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to fight back. It was time to teach Karen a lesson she would never forget. After discovering that I actually owned Karen's house, I couldn't stop laughing at the irony. This woman had spent months trying to control me, issuing fake violations, threatening eviction, and making my life miserable, all while living in a house that belonged to me. The power shift was almost too good to be true, but I didn't just want to laugh about it. I wanted to use this information to teach her a lesson she would never forget. It was time to put my plan into motion. The first thing I did was confirm the details of her lease. Since I had acquired multiple rental properties as part of an investment deal, I had barely looked at the individual tenant records. But once I checked, I found exactly what I needed. Karen was renting the property under a month-to-month lease, which meant I could legally terminate her tenancy with just 30 days' notice. I read through the lease agreement carefully, looking for any clauses that might complicate the eviction, but everything was airtight. Karen had no special protections. The house was legally mine, and I had every right to remove her. Instead of acting immediately, I decided to have a little fun first. I printed out an official-looking HOA violation letter, addressed to Karen, listing ridiculous infractions just like the one she had been sending me. I cited her for excessive yard ornamentation, since she had a bunch of tacky plastic flamingos in her front yard. I fined her for having an unapproved door color, even though it was the same door she had when I bought the place. And my favorite one? A $500 fine for unauthorized harassment of neighbors. I slid the letter into her mailbox and waited. It didn't take long. The next morning, Karen stormed up to my house, red-faced with anger. "This is outrageous," she screeched, waving the letter in my face. "You can't fine me. I run the HOA." I smiled calmly. "Oh, I can't?" I asked. "Well, you've been fining me for ridiculous things." I figured it was only fair to return the favor. She was livid, sputtering about how I had no authority over her. That's when I decided to drop the bombshell. "Actually, Karen, I do have authority over you. You see, I own your house." Her face went pale. "What?" I pulled out my ownership documents and held them up. "Yep, I bought this property as part of a bulk real estate deal. You've been renting from me this entire time, and I just never realized it. Until now." I gave her a smirk. "So, about those HOA violations, you might want to start following your own rules." For the first time ever, Karen was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, trying to form words, but nothing came out. She snatched the documents from my hand and scanned them frantically, probably hoping she'd find some mistake. But there was none. It was all legit. That's when I pulled out the official eviction notice. "And here's the best part," I said cheerfully. "Since you're on a month-to-month lease, I'm legally allowed to terminate it at any time with 30 days' notice. So, consider this your official eviction notice." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't do this," she shrieked. I'll take this to the HOA board. I'll file a complaint. I cut her off. "Oh, you mean the HOA that has no authority over me because I own my home outright?" I chuckled. "And even if they did have power, I don't think the board is going to help you, considering I now own one of the largest properties in the community. If anything, I might just join the HOA myself and make some new rules like banning obnoxious busybodies from harassing their neighbors." She looked like she was about to explode. "This isn't over," she spat before storming off. But, unfortunately for her, it was over. Over the next few weeks, Karen desperately tried to fight back. She sent me letters claiming I was illegally evicting her, but I had already checked my legal rights. I was well within the law. She tried to rally the HOA against me, but many of the other homeowners had also been sick of her nonsense and were secretly thrilled to see her taken down a notch. She even went to the city council to claim I was abusing my power, but they just shrugged. The law was on my side, not hers. Finally, the 30 days were up. On the day of her eviction, Karen was still clinging to some delusional hope that she could stay. But when a moving trucks showed up and the sheriff arrived to enforce the eviction, reality hit her. She had no choice but to leave. As she loaded the last of her boxes in her car, she turned to glare at me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I just smiled. "You know, Karen, I was going to sell this place after you moved out. But now I think I'll just keep it. Maybe I'll rent it to a nice family. Someone who isn't a control freak." Her face twisted in rage, but she had nothing left to say. She climbed into her car, slammed the door, and sped off down the street, never to be seen in the neighborhood again. The second she was gone, the entire community seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The HOA, now free from her iron grip, actually started functioning like a normal HOA. Less aggressive, more reasonable, and focused on actual neighborhood improvements rather than Karen's personal vendettas. As for me, well, I kept her old house as a rental property, and every time I drove past it, I couldn't help but smile at the sweet, sweet karma that had played out. With Karen officially evicted, I thought my troubles were over. But as it turns out, people like her don't go down without a fight. Instead of quietly accepting her fate and moving on, she doubled down on her craziness, making it her personal mission to get revenge. I had won the battle, but Karen wasn't ready to surrender the war. The first sign that she wasn't done came just a few days after she moved out. I started getting strange calls from local businesses, landscapers, pest control, moving companies, all confirming services I had supposedly ordered. Except I hadn't called any of them. Someone had scheduled a full lawn renovation, a deep fumigation, and even a team of movers to help me relocate. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. I managed to cancel everything before I got charged, but it was clear that Karen wasn't letting go. Then came the police visits. Apparently, Karen had filed multiple false reports against me, claiming I was running an illegal business out of my home, disturbing the peace, and even engaging in suspicious activity. One officer admitted that a woman had been calling almost daily to report me for different things. Thankfully, I had documentation of everything: Karen's harassment, her eviction, and her history of complaints. The officers realized what was happening and assured me that I had nothing to worry about. But they warned me that if Karen kept abusing emergency services, she could face legal consequences. Not that it stopped her. One night, I woke up to flashing red and blue lights outside my house. Karen had gone nuclear. She had called the police and falsely reported a break-in at my home. When I opened the door, half-dressed and confused, the officers were already irritated. "Sir, we've received multiple reports from this address. Are you sure everything is okay here?" I sighed. "Let me guess. Karen called you?" They exchanged glances. "We can't disclose the caller's identity, but let's just say this isn't the first time we've been sent here." I explained the whole situation, showed them the eviction notice, and even pulled up security camera footage showing that no one had broken in. The officers were not amused. One of them shook his head and muttered, "This is a waste of our time." They left, but not before filing an official warning against Karen for making false emergency reports. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't just vengeful, she was delusional. A few days later, she showed up at my house demanding to be let back in. "This is MY neighborhood," she shrieked. "You don't belong here. I built this community." I folded my arms. "Karen, you don't live here anymore. You were evicted, remember?" "I don't care," she screamed. "I'll get my house back. I'll take you to court. I cut her off. "Karen, I already spoke with my lawyer. You have zero grounds to sue me. You were legally evicted, and if you set foot on my property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." She lost it. She kicked my trash can over, ripped a potted plant off my porch, and even tried to scratch my car with her keys. That was it. I pulled out my phone and called the police. The moment she realized I was serious, Her face turned pale, and she ran back to her car. But it was too late. I had everything on camera. When the police arrived, I handed over the footage. They took one look at it and immediately went after Karen. By the end of the day, she was arrested for property damage and trespassing. But even then, she didn't stop. From what I heard, she posted all over social media, claiming I had stolen her home, that I had cheated her out of her rightful place in the neighborhood, and that I was some kind of corrupt landlord. The funny thing? No one believed her. The HOA members who had put up with her tyrannical rule for years were thrilled to see her gone. Several of them actually reached out to thank me, saying that the neighborhood felt peaceful for the first time in a long while. Even the new HOA president, who was elected after Karen's eviction, made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with her. She was permanently banned from ever serving on the board again. And then came the final blow. Karen, in a last-ditch effort to win, tried to sue me. She claimed I had wrongfully evicted her, that I had tricked her into leaving, and that she was owed financial compensation. Unfortunately for her, she had no case. Not only was the eviction fully legal, but I had a mountain of evidence proving that she had been harassing me for months. My lawyer didn't even break a sweat. The judge dismissed her case almost immediately. With that, Karen finally disappeared. No one knows exactly where she went, but rumor has it she moved to another HOA-controlled neighborhood, one where she wasn't in charge, but still tried to boss people around. From what I heard, she didn't last long before getting kicked out again. As for me, well, I kept her old house as a rental property, and every time I drove past it, I couldn't help but smile at the sweet, sweet karma that had played out. The best part? The neighborhood actually flourished after Karen's departure. The HOA became reasonable, the absurd rules stopped, and homeowners finally felt like they had control over their own properties again. Several people even approached me to joke about how I should run for HOA president. Though, after dealing with Karen, I decided I had no interest in stepping into that mess. All in all, it was the perfect ending. Karen had spent months trying to ruin my life. Instead, she ended up ruining her own. And honestly, it was beautiful.